Hearing of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will come to order. We welcome the Deputy Secretary Verma to our committee. It's nice to have you here. This hearing will focus on the State Department and the modernization efforts at the State Department. 100 years ago, Congress passed the Rogers Act, laying the foundation for today's foreign service. As we commemorate this anniversary, we should also reflect as to how much has changed over the years. In 1924, American diplomats communicating with Washington did not have cell phones. Traveling to embassies in Europe took days, and the department only had 1,300 employees. Well, today's workforce includes over 75,000 dedicated employees worldwide. It's a far more diverse workforce. Emails and smartphones have replaced telegrams and typewriters. And when crisis erupts, our diplomats can adapt and make decisions using real-time information. Whether it is AI or the spread of infectious diseases, climate change, or strategic competition with our adversaries. In the 21st century, diplomacy has never been more important. Our diplomats are on the front line of advancing the values of our foreign policy. They work with indigenous communities defending the environment in Brazil. They partner with African leaders on democracy and good governance. They battle corruption and stand up for human rights. To succeed, we need them working in the state-of-the-art buildings, both at home and abroad. We need to support the Foreign Service careers that are also have to be concerned about their families, their spouses, their partners, and children. And we need leadership that can make trade-offs to match our resources with our policy priorities. I applaud the administration's recent guidance on merit system principles that protect our civil service. Secretary Verma, I want to welcome you today and thank you for your work you're doing in the department, including your travel to support our workforce in key posts in China, Brazil, India, and Ethiopia. As you know, I supported an ambitious modernization effort at the State Department. When I was active as the chair of the subcommittee on the State Department, working with Senator Hagerty, we held hearings and made many recommendations, many of which were incorporated in legislation that was passed by the Congress. I'm pleased to see initiatives we supported in recent state authorizations bills realized, like the establishment of the Provost and Board of Visitors at the Foreign Service Institute. I look forward to hearing about where we are on the Reserve Corps. We need to support training and professional development for our diplomats so they have the tools they need to tackle the complex challenges of the 21st century. I'm also pleased to hear you are developing the training courses on multilateral institutions so the United States is leading in these critical fronts, and that you are launching applications for the mid-career mentorship program. But I believe there is more progress that needs to be made. We need to invest in our diplomats' skill sets, from digital diplomacy and economic statecraft to crisis management, to language proficiency and cultural understandings. Our diplomats need the knowledge and expertise to succeed in their mission. We also need to address the staff shortages that have particularly large impact at hardship posts and mid-level positions. When our diplomatic missions are not adequately staffed, it hurts the mission and morale. That's why I supported the President's budget request to continue hiring at an increased rate and incentivizing service in hardship posts. We also need to offer career advancement opportunities to attract and retain top talent. I look forward to the results of the Department's new lateral entry program for mid-level employees. I applaud the administration's efforts to advance diversity and equity, including the appointment of the Department's second Chief Diversity Officer and implementing equity action plans. Whether our diplomats come from Baltimore or Boise, our diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility policies mean they will serve with integrity and authenticity abroad. Our diplomats must reflect the diversity of our nation, and they must understand the global community and have a better root in the needs that we have around the world. That means a more diverse workforce. As Congress did a century ago with the Rogers Act, today we are also have an essential role to play in the Department's modernization efforts. For the last 3 years now, we have passed into law the State Department authorization bills. I want to thank Senator Risch for his cooperation as we've developed in a bipartisan way the reauthorization bills now in 3 Congresses. We look forward to doing the same again this year, which gives us an opportunity to advance the priorities of this committee to help you in regards to those modernization efforts. Coming back to this hearing, we hope this hearing will help us in sorting out what we can do to help you in your efforts to modernize the State Department. With that, let me yield to the distinguished ranking member, Senator Risch.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Verma, one of the primary roles of the Deputy Secretary for Management and Resources is to keep track and keep the department moving forward while it's staying on track. From here, it does not appear things are going well. I hope you can shed some light today on why things seem to be going so badly for an organization this committee has tried so hard to steer in the right direction. As I have spent time as both the chairman and ranking member of this committee over the past 5 years, I have pushed the department to rebalance its risk tolerance and be more forward-leaning in its overseas engagements. You've heard me say over and over again, we aren't going to outcompete China with our personnel sitting behind embassy walls. They need to get out. As part of this effort, I wrote and got enacted the Security Embassy Construction and Counterterrorism Act to help the department open new diplomatic spaces quicker and cheaper and to advance our diplomatic interest. More than 2 years later, SECA hasn't been implemented because the department hasn't issued final guidance. That failure to issue final guidance is in violation of law. This means the department can't deliver on its ambitious agenda to open new embassies in places where we are directly contending with China, like the Pacific Islands. If the department is going to take the threat from Beijing seriously, SECA guidance needs to go out tomorrow. I'm tired of the department slow-walking key reforms that would improve its efficiency and effectiveness. This administration constantly talks about its modernization agenda, but it is focusing on the wrong things if it can't get this right. It appears to many of us that the department under President Biden is more concerned with pursuing its own arbitrary DEI goals than results-focused efforts to modernize its operations and workforce. Similarly, bureaucrats at Maine State are micromanaging the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. Washington has put our ambassador there in a straitjacket by limiting the number of diplomats we can have on the ground and placing nonsensical travel restrictions on our own people there. Our experts on the ground should make these decisions, not folks sitting 5,000 miles away in Washington. These restrictions limit our effectiveness while also greatly reducing oversight of the assistance we send to the freedom fighters in Ukraine. This is not how you win a war. Most egregiously, the Rob Malley saga has spun wildly out of control. I have learned that Mr. Malley illegally transferred classified documents to his personal email, an exceptionally troubling allegation, and one I found out aside from the State Department, who we've been asking these questions to for months. Your department has failed to respond for months to repeated informal requests for information. We can't help but conclude there's an orchestrated effort to obscure the facts from Congress. It's not just me, some radical Republican. The chairman and I have done this side by side, and we have been incredibly frustrated with the response that we've gotten. In fact, it was embarrassing, really, the hearing that we had, closed hearing, where we tried to extricate the information. And these people, I think, could have withstood a torture session before they would release the information. It was disgusting. We deserve to know whether Mr. Malley's crimes impacted U.S.-Iran policy, influenced nuclear discussions, or swayed the president's decisions to unfreeze cash for wrongfully detained Americans, or, importantly, misinformed us as we try to formulate foreign policy. We want answers to our questions about what he did, when he did it, and how much damage he has caused U.S. national security. We also deserve to know why he hasn't been prosecuted for mishandling classified documents. Finally, I want to underscore my disagreement with the department continually rewarding unqualified people with promotions and ambassadorial nominations. In November 2023, I sent a letter stating that I would not support moving any nominees complicit in the horrific treatment of U.S. diplomats in China during COVID-19. You have heard me preach about this over and over again on this committee about how badly China treated our diplomats during COVID and how the department did not protect our employees there. So I sent this letter on November 23 saying I'm not going to support anybody that was complicit. Well, lo and behold, somebody didn't read the letter, or maybe nobody read the letter, because Embassy Beijing Chargé and DCM David Meal was named in that letter. Last week, the president nominated him to be U.S. ambassador to Bangladesh. Now, I'm going to get beat up by my good friend here saying, now, how come you won't let us have a hearing? Why won't you? I told you in November of 23, find somebody else for these positions. Mr. Mealy presided over some of the worst abuses of our diplomats. In summer 2021, the Chinese government stepped up its unlawful detention of American diplomats. Unlawful detention of American diplomats, and put diplomats not in hospitals, but in container units with barred windows in overgrown fields outside major cities. The embassy did not try to get these people out, and they told U.S. diplomats to comply. No one who allowed a foreign adversary to treat U.S. diplomats this way should be a U.S. ambassador. In short, it seems like the department currently can't get out of its own way and focus on what really matters, which is advancing U.S. national security and keeping Americans safe. There are more than 75,000 State Department employees, good people, hardworking people. The vast, vast majority are who are doing very well. They're spread out across the globe, giving their blood, sweat, and tears to support this country. They deserve our best. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, let me just comment before introducing our Deputy Secretary. I certainly agree with your last two lines of your opening statement.
So then let's move on.
I just, on the Mallory issue, it's been frustrating. I agree with, I wanted to underscore the point that I agree that additional information should be made available in a classified setting. But I want to make it clear, I don't think the State Department is the one making that, has the opportunity to make that decision. It's under investigation by a different agency, and the State Department is not the custodian of the information that the ranking member and I sought.
But they do have the information.
It is an active investigation in which they are required to follow the lead agency that has the information. That's my understanding of it, and they're not at liberty to be able to accommodate us without the lead agency giving the sign-off, and the lead agency will not give the sign-off.
I respectfully disagree. They've got it. They're in front of this committee.
I'm not even sure they have all the information.
They admitted they have.
It is compartmentalized. Anyway, I just really wanted to make that clear. I don't hold the State Department responsible for the failure to provide the information.
I do.
And I know we disagree on that. And the second point I want to just bring up about your concern about how diplomats were handled during COVID by the Chinese government, as we have been able to discover, that policy was set at State Department, not at Mission Beijing, and it was set by the political leadership at the State Department under the Trump administration. So I'm a little bit puzzled as to why you're taking this out on the appointments by the Biden administration. With that, let me introduce our witness for today. Richard Verma serves as the Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources. In this role, he acts as the Chief Operating Officer of the Department and leads the Department's effort on modernization, foreign assistance, and a wide range of workforce and strategic issues. Deputy Secretary Verma previously served as the U.S. Ambassador to India, where he led one of the largest diplomatic missions and championed historic progress in bilateral ties. He's also a former Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs and the former National Security Advisor to the Senate Majority Leader. Secretary Verma, it's a pleasure to have you here. You may proceed. Your full testimony will be made part of our record. We ask that you try to summarize your comments in about 5 minutes so we can get engaged in the discussion.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Risch, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to testify before you today regarding our management of the State Department and the significant progress we've made on key reforms. I want to thank the committee for the strong support of the department and our nearly 80,000 people spread across every corner of the world, serving in nearly every conflict zone. We're proud that our workforce hails from every state in the country, with an estimated 20% who are also military veterans. It's been an enormous honor to return to the department as Deputy Secretary after serving as Assistant Secretary for Legislative Affairs and as U.S. Ambassador to India. In my first year, I've been to more than 45 of our embassies and consulates around the world. From the war in Ukraine to the attacks of October 7th and the resulting broader escalation across the Middle East to the intense global competition with the People's Republic of China, the conventional geopolitical landscape is as challenging as it's ever been. Add to that the transnational threats of terrorism, pandemics, climate change, migration, and cybersecurity, and you have a rising set of challenges that require even greater international coordination, cooperation, and leadership from the United States. This mix of old and new threats puts even greater weight on the important work done by diplomats and development experts across the world. And I'm pleased to say that the department is proactively adapting to new mission sets and is laser focused on building and supporting our workforce to be better equipped to tackle today's global challenges. Under our modernization agenda, we are focused on building new capacity and fostering expertise across emerging critical mission areas. We're hiring and training and retaining a diverse and dynamic and entrepreneurial team and leveraging innovative new technologies and platforms. We launched, for example, several new offices and bureaus designed to centralize expertise. For example, the new Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy, the Office of Critical and Emerging Technology, a consolidated China House, and a new Bureau of Global Health Security and Diplomacy. We're also equipping our workforce for new missions, and we're attracting and training and retaining the right talent. Let me just mention a few of the reforms. We've greatly increased our training opportunities, expanding our training float. We have a new mid-level training program at the Foreign Service Institute. We have a new learning policy, and we're creating new opportunities for civil servants and foreign service professionals to fill essential assignments. We're reaching out and recruiting in new and innovative ways, expanding the pool of qualified applicants. Small but impactful changes, such as how and when the Foreign Service exam is administered, helps break down geographic and other barriers. We also now have paid internships for all our interns, thanks to the support of Congress, and this committee in particular, which is a game changer for so many young Americans. We have a new employee retention unit, which collects data from across the employee experience, and we use it in exit interviews to better understand why people leave. And this team is developing the first ever wide department retention plan. I also want to note the gratitude of the department and our 50,000 locally employed staff for the efforts of this committee to preserve the availability of special immigrant visas through the Grateful Act. Our local staff now remain able to move their families to the United States at the conclusion of a career of long and faithful service to the U.S. government. An empowered and educated workforce also needs modern tools and technology, and we have a new enterprise-wide artificial intelligence strategy. We're using data analytics like we've never done before. We have a new cyber strategy. In terms of American citizen services, today more Americans have passports than at any time in our history, with more than 160 million valid U.S. passports in circulation. We issued 24 million passports in 2023. Similarly, more people can travel to the U.S. than ever before. We issued more than 10.4 million non-immigrant visas last year, 563,000 immigrant visas, resulting in nearly $240 billion economic impact to the United States, contributing to more than 9.5 million American jobs. And we are bringing down the visa wait times considerably. The safety of American citizens overseas remains our highest priorities. Last year, we assisted nearly 70,000 Americans in some sort of crisis or emergency somewhere around the world. Finally, I want to note in closing our gratitude for the passage of the National Security Supplemental, which will greatly aid our efforts to support Ukraine and Israel, counter China in the Indo-Pacific, and provide urgent humanitarian support in key regions. So while the range and complexity of the challenges confronting the U.S. and our allies and partners around the world can seem daunting, I am heartened and encouraged by our incredible workforce and the missions they take on each day. And while the vast majority of their work goes unreported or unseen by the media or even known by most Americans, the work they do with your support helps make the world a more secure and more safe and more prosperous place. And I'm so grateful to our entire State Department team, and I know the Secretary and our leadership team will continue to support them in every possible way. Appreciate this opportunity to testify before you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We'll now have the first round. I just want to make an observation. During the height of coming out of COVID, the number of requests we got in our office concerning passport applications and the concerns about visa being issued, et cetera, were required us almost to have additional staff people just to handle the calls to our office. I can tell now by the volume that that issue has been in the right path of being resolved. The economic impact of visas and tourism here in the United States, I'm glad you mentioned that. We hear that frequently, that the United States is a much more challenging destination for non-Americans to come to than other parts of the world. So I'm glad that you're focusing on that, because it's not only an economic interest to make sure that that's handled efficiently, it's also to bring a better understanding of America and the people-to-people contact. So I just really want to make that observation, and I thank you for the progress you're making. We still need to make more. As you know, last December, following intense discussions with the State Department, we were able to pass the Combating Global Corruption Act and the National Defense Authorization Act. I thank Senator Young of this committee, my co-sponsor of that legislation, that requires the State Department to put a higher focus on anti-corruption activities in our mission, consistent with President Biden's statement as to the need of this as a core national security concern. Can you tell us how the budget that you've requested will allow you to implement this law, and how we are progressing to carry out the legislation that was passed?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you for your leadership on that issue. We have been progressing well. We've been working closely with your staff. The report that's required is underway and being drafted. And so this continues to be a very high priority for the department, and I think you'll be satisfied with the report and the mechanisms, and we have the resources to do this, and appreciate what the team has done. I will say, I was able to be the senior U.S. official at the anti-corruption conference sponsored by the United Nations in December in Atlanta of last year, which brought together over 100 countries from around the world. And this legislation actually featured in some of what we were talking about, but the role that the U.S. plays in combating corruption continues to be essential. And again, your leadership, and I think this legislation will be another important tool.
I want to give you a little bit more opportunity to tell us how the China House is proceeding. It's a real effort to put an attention as to the challenges we have with China that allow so many of our diplomats to spend time understanding the challenges of China by actually being in a setting that gives them the background rather than being just in their one country. Can you just tell us how the China House is proceeding?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, when we talk about modernizing the department, we talk about making sure we are doing those missions that matter most to the American people and to our strategic interests. And obviously, our competition with China is top among them. And what we felt like is we needed not just a bilateral look at how we were doing in our competition, but we needed a global look and a global understanding of how we were competing with China, from Africa to Latin America, on trade, on security, people-to-people ties, you name it. And the China House is that consolidated effort. And so that is actually up and running, and it's working well. We are going to continue to build that out, not only build it out, but also build out people's expertise with regard to what's actually happening in China with a deeper understanding. And so when we talk about training and we talk about critical missions, it's essential that we connect up the training that people have to give them the skill sets in these critical mission areas. So we are incentivizing people to actually, both foreign service and civil service, to have a deeper understanding on China. So it's the China House effort, it's the additional training, and it is the resources that the Congress has given us to put into this competition. So it is a full court press.
If it was up to most of us on this committee, we would give you a larger share of the pie of this nation's resources to carry out your mission. We think you are underfunded generally, so I'm not going to be too tough as to how the resources are being allocated and you being able to meet your mission. But we talk about the float so that our diplomats can get the training they need, whether they're spending time at the China House or whether they're at the taking a course at the facilities that are available. Training is essential not only before they become diplomats, but when they are diplomats. You can't do that unless you have the personnel that can fill in during the training missions. We've been trying to create this float. What progress have we made, and where are the challenges still? Giving you inadequate resources so that we can take advantage of the training opportunities that are there.
Right. I think we've actually made a lot of progress on the training float. So at any given time, we have about 1,400 people undergoing some sort of training. The vast majority of those have been in language training. For the first time, we've added about 250 positions dedicated to training, but in the critical missions area. And about 150 of those are going to be foreign service specialists and generalists, and about 100 of those are going to be civil service specialists. We've also made it possible for civil service employees to get the kind of mobility they've asked for by backfilling those civil service professionals that have gone into the training float. Colin Powell talked about establishing a training float 23 years ago. We are up and running on the training float. We are doing a lot more than language. You mentioned our budget constraints and our staffing shortages. It is hard when you have a 13% staffing gap on the Foreign Service and Civil Service to take people out and put them into training, but it's also essential. We have to be able to do it while we reduce this staffing gap. And we also, fiscal year 24 ended up with about a 6% budget cut, which also has a real impact on our ability to fully roll out the training float we want. But we are moving forward with it. The Secretary and I and others believe it's very, very important.
Sure. Senator Risch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Verma, you heard my criticism of the department regarding the implementation of CECA. CECA was drafted and passed so that we could get things moving quicker. You're the person in charge of that, I gather. Is that right?
I'm happy to be. I am happy to be.
Yes or a no?
Yes, I am happy to be that person.
Can you give me just I don't want a blah, blah, blah answer. Give me one sentence why you have failed to comply with the law's requirement that was passed 2 years ago, that you had 6 months to issue final guidance, and why 2 years later that final guidance hasn't been issued.
So, Senator Risch, let me say up front, I agree with you. Our people want to be out engaging with the public. They don't want to be behind big walls. And so we've actually been aggressively opening, frankly, new embassies in the Pacific Islands. We have a new embassy in Solomon Islands, Seychelles, in Indian Ocean, Tonga. We are opening in Vanuatu and Maldives. We've actually used the authority that you've given us to exercise the waiver on setback in a number of embassies around the world in new construction. The guidance that you're asking for is coming out shortly. I promise you of that. We are in absolute agreement. It takes, let me tell you why it's hard. Because you have to have that rigorous debate between the security professionals, between the people who are building, and we want to do this right. Because if you just say, well, reduce the setback and co-locate in all of these places in the world, which is what the authority gives us, which is what we want, and you don't do it carefully, you do run into security challenges. We are doing it carefully. I think you'll appreciate the guidance when it comes out. It is coming out soon.
You said soon and shortly. Those words mean something to me, but maybe not the same as what they mean to you. So tell me what soon and shortly mean.
Well,
and by the way, I think that's a good explanation of what you've given. It still doesn't respond to the fact that there is specific final guidance that was required and didn't come out. So let's get that behind us and talk about when that will happen, shortly or soon.
Look, we are working on it as we speak, and so this has been an intensive conversation, again, in the department, and we want to do this, and we want to do it right, and we want to be able to roll this out in a way that I think lives up to the spirit. Frankly, we want to do more.
I know you do, and that's why I had the law drawn and passed and got through.
Right.
Will it be less than 6 months?
Yes, absolutely.
Will it be less than 90 days?
I'm hoping it's in the next few weeks.
Hope is not a strategy. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for what you're doing in that regard. I'm glad you're paying attention to it. It's the right thing to do, and believe me, we worked with the department, as you know, when we drew SECA and when we passed SECA.
Well,
and so we know the department wants to do this.
I will say there's a reason why I've been to 45 embassies and consulates. It's not just for the frequent flyer miles. It is to really see firsthand the challenges in building in urban areas and the real security issues we have. But we want the flexibility, and I think you will be pleased with how we actually implement it.
Okay, I'm going to ask these questions, not expecting an answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Can you confirm that the Bureau of Diplomatic Security suspended Mr. Malley's clearance because he improperly transferred classified U.S. government information to his personal email account and/or device that is not authorized to store such information?
Yeah, Senator, I think you know that we're limited on what we can say, and Rob Malley has been on leave since last summer. It has been publicly reported that this is because of his security clearance was suspended. There are security professionals that review this matter. I will just say it is consistent with longstanding executive branch and Department of State policies and practice that we cannot comment or provide documents or information in a public setting related to personnel, security, law enforcement, or investigations pertaining to any individual. So unfortunately, I don't have much I can share with you in this public setting.
Can you confirm that a malign cyber actor actually gained access to Mr. Malley's personal email and/or phone?
Yet, Senator, I'm not in a position to speak to the status of the investigation or anything related to it.
Well, my time's up, and I didn't get what I wanted out of that, and probably won't until we agree to issue a subpoena for that information.
Senator, can I, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, Senator, you raised our China situation, and I just wanted to, having just been in China last week, I just wanted to respond to that directly, and I know you raised it with me multiple times in the past, and I greatly appreciate you speaking out on behalf of the workforce, especially those who had to go through a terrible situation in China.
And you, above all, understand the workforce disillusionment with the way they were treated by China and the fact that they believe that the department didn't stand up for them.
Well, Senator, I would say no one was happy with the situation. I will say we had to waive privileges and immunities in 50 countries in order to continue to show up in places, including in China.
But they didn't all treat them like China treated our.
Well, some were pretty bad. China, what our workforce went through was not acceptable, and the 16 people plus kids that were separated, again, not something that any of our workforce should ever go through. I will say, as I said a year ago to you, or over a year ago in my own hearing, we had a choice to make about being present or not being present. Secretary Pompeo, the Undersecretary for Management, Governor Branstad, Ambassador Branstad made a policy decision. I don't question that decision sitting before you today. They made a policy decision that it was in the interest of the United States to be there, and it was going to be really painful for the workforce to get back to China. Now, the people who had to implement that, Rob Forden, David Mealy, the people you were talking about, actually were the ones there on the ground trying to work through an exceptionally difficult situation, trying to arrange medevac for our people, trying to fight with the Chinese government every day on behalf of those people, and to hold them accountable or responsible, to punish them, I just feel is the wrong direction. Hold me accountable. Honestly, I am the policy person. I'm the senior official for management. But they were implementing a policy taken by leaders in Washington and by the ambassador, who I'm not faulting them. I'm just saying it does send a chilling effect to senior officials around the world when they have to do difficult things. No one is accepting or endorsing or thinking what the Chinese did was acceptable. It was not. But these officials had to implement a very, very difficult situation and, frankly, recovered from it and brought us to a place of normalcy with Ambassador Burns' leadership and others. So that is the only thing I wanted to say. I spent a lot of time on this, and I don't think we see it in the same way. And these are people you might vote against, but to block their consideration from future advancement is just, I just ask you to think about that.
I can tell you, and you know, that the scars are long and deep and long-lasting from what happened there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I just want to comment, we're talking about, in most cases, career diplomats, and we expect our career diplomats to carry out the instructions of the senior management, from the President of the United States to the Secretary of State. And I just really want to agree completely with Secretary Verma. There is a morale issue when we question their dedication when they are basically carrying out a policy. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary Verma, for being here. And despite our questions, we very much appreciate the work that you do every day. Last month, I wrote a letter to President Biden. Senator Collins co-signed that with me, as did a number of our colleagues, including the chair and ranking member of this committee. We were concerned about evidence that has surfaced on the 60 Minutes program about the GRU's involvement in directed energy attacks against our American government officials and their families. And we have not gotten a response to that letter, but I do remain concerned that this administration seems reluctant to cite attribution for what's happening there and to go back and re-examine the evidence that has surfaced and reconsider the assessments of what went on there. So can I ask for your help in working with the interagency to get a response to that letter?
Absolutely.
And I appreciated our conversation yesterday where I raised the concern about families who were affected by those attacks. I have a constituent whose young children were affected, and there's concern that once they turn 18, they will no longer be eligible for coverage for treatment, and we don't really know what the long-term impacts are. So again, I hope the department will work with our office to make necessary changes to ensure that families who have had children affected are going to have some reassurance that those kids are going to get the protection they need.
Senator, absolutely. Thank you for your leadership on this. Thank you for looking out for, again, our workforce that's been impacted. The attribution question is one that continues to be researched. As you know, the community has not been able to point to a specific actor or country, but that work continues. In the meantime, what the Secretary has said and what we're committed to is making sure people are taken care of. These are real symptoms with real impacts and real pain and real suffering, and they deserve to be cared for, and that's what we're doing.
Well, thank you. We look forward to continuing to work on this to ensure that people are protected. I think one of the biggest threats to the United States and to democracies around the world is disinformation and misinformation. Now, the Global Engagement Center was set up to help address this issue. Their authorization is going to expire in December, and I think there are still too many in Congress who don't have a appreciation for what the Global Engagement Center was designed to do and how effective they are in carrying out that mission. So can you talk, for the benefit of anybody who may be listening, about why they have a critical role to play in not just in the State Department, but in our national security?
No, I appreciate you raising it. The Global Engagement Center has been doing an incredible job of shining a light on the misinformation and disinformation that is being used around the world to impact our partners and our allies, frankly, to impact our own strategic interests. It is a very intense competition in that space, and we cannot cede the field to Russia, to China, to others. And we finally have a group of experts who are doing this and doing this exactly the right way. They don't operate in the United States in any way. I know there's been concerns about, are they funding that kind of research or programmatic activity in the United States? They absolutely do not and will not. But to have their mandate expire at the end of the year would be a devastating blow to our effort to be able to compete in one of the new critical domains which we have to show up and compete and document and show to people what our adversaries are doing. And this is the wrong time to cede the ground.
Well, I totally agree with that. Do you have any specific examples of what the GEC has done that we can point to that show their effectiveness?
Absolutely. I mean, they've put out a number of reports that actually attribute a lot of misinformation and disinformation to the Russian and Chinese governments, and the intent that information was put out to do harm either to one of our partners or to ourselves. So it's shining a light on that is so important. And again, we can get you their work has been very, very impressive, and I think it should continue.
Again, I agree with that, and I hope that you will give some thought to how we better do outreach to the American public and to members of Congress about the effectiveness of the GEC and about why that's so important. I think, as I said, I think one of the biggest threats to our country and our national security is disinformation, and there isn't, I believe, enough of an appreciation on the part of the public for the extent to which certain issues are manipulated.
Yeah, appreciate you raising it, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Deputy Secretary Verma, for being here today. On April 19th, the Jewish Insider published an article entitled "Inside the State Department's Anti-Israel Listening Sessions." And I just want to read you a few quotes from State Department personnel who attended some of these listening sessions. Quote, "It was overwhelmingly calls, including from people I respect, that we need to do more to sanction Israel, we need to do more to punish Israel, we need to be more serious considering ways in which we can sanction them, condition aid, cut off aid, reduce weapons flow," end quote, said one Foreign Service officer with 2 decades of Middle East experience. Quote, "There were people whose issues don't have anything to do with the conflict who are making the case for why we need to do more to bash Israel," end quote. The article goes on to say that what stood out to some of the department folks was that at these recent listening sessions, senior leaders were unwilling to defend our support for Israel's security, particularly in response to the chorus of employees seeking a harsher stance against the Jewish state there. As a result, lower-level folks who support Israel do not feel empowered to speak up in these sessions. And to me, this sounds like it's a management problem, it's a leadership problem. It could be creating a toxic work environment here. We certainly don't want the State Department to become like Columbia University. Deputy Secretary Verma, as a senior leader in the department, have you led or attended any of these listening sessions?
Yeah, look, Senator, I don't know about that listening session that's described, but in terms of outreach to our workforce, I have probably, I don't know, done 10 or 11 or 12 outreach. I've done town halls with embassies across the Middle East. I've done meetings with our Jewish American employees. I've done meetings with Arab American employees. I've done as much outreach as I possibly can because this is a very difficult issue. I will tell you, in none of the meetings that I presided over or attended was there anything that's being described in that article. So I'm not familiar with what that article is referencing, but boy, if we aren't engaging with our workforce during one of the most challenging situations, one of the most significant threats to Israel and its people, one of the most horrific terrorist attacks, but also one of the most significant humanitarian difficult situations we've had in Gaza. These are issues that really weigh on people. Proud of the work that the team continues to do to support Israel and its defense needs, while we are also trying to make sure humanitarian goods are flowing. So this engagement with the workforce that I have been part of has nothing to do with what's described in that article.
So obviously, you've had experience there as before. So these listening sessions were not set up specifically to talk about Israel, or were they?
The outreach that, again, I can only speak to what I have done. The outreach that I have done has been to hear what's been on people's minds about the situation in the Middle East, both the impact that it's had on workforce in terms of stress and workload.
But yes, they were about Israel. Were these things also kind of these listening sessions then done for Iraq and Afghanistan and other?
Well, look, it was about
the
the situation in the broader Middle East. It was not about Israel specifically. It was about listening to the views of the workforce itself about what was happening. Both the terrible and horrific terrorist attack and the impact that it's had on the workforce, in addition to how we now respond, both militarily and from a humanitarian perspective.
So were similar sessions done for different situations, like, again, Iraq or Afghanistan or something like that?
I can only speak to, I'm sure they were during previous periods. I wasn't there to participate in those, but I will say, Senator, from a management perspective, I think these have been exceptionally important, and they have not been stilted or kind of preconceived to elicit one opinion over another. It's meant to really give folks a chance to express themselves and to, frankly, share information.
So there's other ways that people can voice their concerns, right? Like dissent cables, which are supposed to remain silent. Do you worry that, at least in the perspective of some of the folks here were quoted, that you're creating you talked about a chilling effect earlier, you're creating a chilling effect here with the folks who support Israel that aren't, at least in this case, didn't feel supported by senior leadership to articulate the views of why we're doing what we're doing to allow Israel to defend themselves?
Look, I haven't, from the Secretary, from others, I have not seen that, and we have made it very clear that we will not stand for anti-Semitism in the department. We will not stand for its viewpoints. We will not stand for people that speak or express opinions of anti-Semitism in that way. So, no, I don't see a chilling effect.
Have you seen anybody resign with regard to feeling like Israel is not being supported enough, and do you worry that you're not, that you're...
I have not seen that.
You have not seen anybody resign with regard to that?
I've seen people resign because they think we're providing too much assistance, but I have not seen people resign because they think we are not doing enough to support Israel.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Secretary Verma. It's good to see you. It was good to talk with you yesterday in my office. I just wanted to pick up on a couple things that I asked you during your confirmation hearing. I think Senator Cardin raised them as well, but just to get an update because you made progress since confirmation on the passport backlog and the visa backlog. If you could just very briefly speak to what challenges remain mostly on both those fronts. And I know that there's still visa backlogs with respect to a number of countries. Could you just talk about where you are in your plan to get it to where we'd like to be?
So I am actually very happy to report that the passport processing times are back to pre-pandemic levels, so 6 to 8 weeks for a routine request, 2 to 3 weeks for expedited. 48% of Americans have a passport, have 160 million passports in circulation. 2023, 24 million passports were issued. We're talking about a pilot to roll out on online renewal. So there's actually a lot of innovation happening in the passport space and feel really good about the progress that we've made. We've now got to keep up with the peak demand in travel season, and again, so far, we've gotten through that for this year, and all the credit goes to the consular team. Again, visa wait times, we are back to pre-pandemic levels, except for one category, which is the visitor visa category. We have reduced the wait times by 70% in 18 months. So the global median is about 40 days for visitor visas. That's the one category. There are a number of countries where we still have wait times that are too long. Mexico, Colombia, India, a few others. But even these are coming down. We're doing that by, frankly, hiring more people as much as we can. And the team does have a pathway to get these back to a normal wait time. I mentioned the huge economic impact that this has, the number of students coming, foreign students that this contributes to American universities. So this is really, really important to us, and I think there's been significant progress over the last year.
Well, congratulations on the progress, and look forward to working with you on making sure we ultimately get where we want to go. Thank you for referencing the Grateful Act in your comments. I was proud to author that legislation to make good on our promises to foreign nationals who are working at our embassies and consulates around the world, and also to have authored the Foreign Service Families Act. So if you could please just provide a brief update on implementation of the Grateful Act and implementation of the Foreign Service Families Act. The Foreign Service Families Act specifically with respect to helping the spouses of our foreign service officers or other State Department employees find productive work at overseas posts.
Thank you for both of those. We really, both of those pieces of legislation were essential. I'm told we've issued something like 1,500 visas already under the Grateful Act, under the special immigrant visa category. So incredible uptake on that already. And I'm also told that the wait times by this fall will, again, be back to a bit of a normal wait time instead of the multi-year period that people were facing. Hugely impactful already. On spousal employment or partner employment, eligible family member employment is a huge plus for the department. We have people with incredible skills, up to around 6,000 eligible family members that are being deployed around the world, and you will see them on consular lines, you will see them in political and economic sections. So we are trying to do even better when it comes to security clearance process to make sure they're onboarded more quickly. But this is a really key component of making sure families are able to stay together, and frankly, that families can work, and that we want this incredible talent to contribute to to the embassy mission.
I appreciate that, and thank you for your implementation of that. Last question, as you know, there are a number of doctors and other medical workers, including some Americans who are right now trapped in Gaza, trying to get out. I've been in touch with Ambassador Liu about this. Could you explain, give me an update on where we are in making sure that they can safely leave?
Yeah, Senator, again, thank you for raising it. We are aware of the case. We have been in touch with the government of Israel. We have been in touch with, again, our counterparts in Egypt and in the region to make sure we can get certain emergency cases, especially ones like these, the clearance that they need to get out safely, and the team is working on it as we speak.
All right, I appreciate the updates from Ambassador Liu. If you could keep me posted from the home front here, I would appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Secretary Verma, I was pleased to see the budget request for FY25 includes the creation of 3 new Foreign Service positions overseas for democracy and human rights. I must say 3 does not seem to be an adequate number. The human rights issues are extremely challenging, and we need to be aggressive in promoting human rights. Just tell me briefly how you anticipate these 3 positions aiding our assistance of advancing American values of human rights globally.
Well, Senator, I agree with you. 3 is probably not sufficient, and we are in a situation where we are facing democratic backsliding and retrenchment in key parts of the world, so we're going to have to continue to work on this. Let me come back to you with specifics about how these 3 positions are, where they're actually going to be implemented, but I will just say the team working on democracy, human rights, and labor continues to be so essential in their voice, and just showing up, the American voice and American leadership in these difficult areas is really, without us, advocates and people fighting for democracy in different parts of the world would be on their own. And so the grants that we administer, the programs that we administer, really are a lifeline for so many different groups and so many different individuals in parts of the world, and I really credit the DRL team for what they do.
So let me ask you a specific question about the flexibility on staffing. We recognize that you have missions that have to be staffed, but there are urgent issues that develop, Sudan being a prime example. The RSF right now in its atrocities in Darfur is something that needs to be responded to. We now have a special envoy. How do you get the resources necessary to meet that type of challenge quickly as the manager of the State Department resources? Yeah,
it's a great question, and it's also why the creation of a reserve corps is something that we want to stand up with your support. So what we try to do is, we try to incentivize people to come into critical missions, but we also do have a kind of rapid reserve group ready to respond to different crises. They have the background and expertise. They've worked on other crises in the past, and those are people we can sometimes pull into the critical missions as well. But this is actually probably a 2-year planning process where we actually look at what are the key priorities, what resources are needed, and then we allocate that over the course of the debate internally on our budget. And then we look at it again to make sure we have the right number of people working on the issue sets that matter. This is going to change as different crises pop up in the world. And you mentioned Sudan, for example. And so the Bureau will then have to shift resources over if they have it. They will come to the senior leaders if they need help from across the department, and then we try to make that available. So we try to be flexible and meet the need that the different bureaus have when there is an emergency or a crisis.
And Sudan might be a good example for us to follow. It is extremely challenging right now in Sudan and Chad, and the complications by other countries offering support that is counterproductive to peace in the region. We need U.S. presence there. So are we moving in regards to Sudan to make sure that we have adequate State Department resources to try to deal with this crisis?
So one of the things about the supplemental is that it did provide a significant amount of assistance for humanitarian relief. That was a big piece of the supplemental that was essential to the department. And so that gets deployed through our Population, Refugees, and Migration Bureau. It'll get deployed through USAID. So yes, we are trying to put as much as we can into responding to the refugee situation that we have, which is massive and probably the largest in the world today. The exodus from Sudan, and it's of a top priority for the department.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I just want to respond. Senator Ricketts asked if there had been other listening sessions, and I'm told that we've had other listening sessions on Afghanistan recently in the last couple of years. And I know there were listening sessions on Iraq previously as well, so it's not an uncommon practice.
Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Secretary Verma. We've been working, recently, and I certainly have been working very hard on Americas in particular to move more nominations through the committee. But the fact remains that the Senate holds on ambassadorial nominees are harming our national interest. If you look at a chart of where we have people and where we don't, and where the PRC and Russia have people, they have people everywhere. and often you're looking at a big goose egg for us in critical parts of the world. Just some recent examples. When there was the coup in Niger, we have a lot of U.S. service members in Niger, and we've lost U.S. service members in Niger in counterterrorism activities. We had no ambassador in country. That coup has led to a government that now wants to kick the U.S. out, and they've moved in a pro-Russia direction, but we had no ambassador. When the security situation in Haiti spiraled downward, we had no ambassador in place. When Hamas attacked Israel on October 7, we didn't have an ambassador in Egypt. We didn't have a confirmed counterterrorism coordinator. When the Houthis started to fire at U.S. and other ships in the Red Sea, we didn't have an ambassador in Djibouti. And China not only had an ambassador, but is building a massive port there. Now, after these emergencies, I think there was a little bit of a guilt trip. Well, I guess we better have an ambassador. And so those positions that I mentioned have now been filled. But after the fact, the doors open and the horses have escaped and the coup has happened and the U.S. relationship with the previous government is now kind of in the past tense. And we didn't have an ambassador in place. Tell us how these holds affect states' ability to advance U.S. interests and protect our national security.
Senator, thank you. Thank you for the question. We spent a lot of time on this, and I am concerned about the trend lines. When we go back and look 20 years ago in the Bush administration, it took about 75 days to go from nomination to confirmation. Today, that number is about 250 days from nomination to confirmation.
And can I just interrupt you there? And that's not just for the political appointees. The thing that is a little bit unusual about this is you see the holds of these career appointees who served under presidents of both parties, who had to pass one of the toughest exams in the country to become an FSO, and then have patriotically served all over the world. You see the hold of the careers that in many instances are equally as deleterious and damaging as the holds on the politicals, and yet when we get the careers on the floor, they end up passing like by a 90-10 vote. So what was the hold all about?
Right. No, you're exactly right. So it has a ripple effect. You mentioned we're not present where we need to be, and this is our deputy chiefs of mission and chargés do an incredible job. But when this Senate gives the stamp of approval to a president's nominee to show up in Capitol, it is very different. And
tell me that a little bit. So maybe there's an attitude up here like, well, we got some great DCMs, so why does it matter? And we do have great DCMs. So tell us why it matters.
Your confirmation gives those candidates a different level of standing. They show up with a letter from the president that they present to the head of state, gives them a different level of understanding. They have chief of mission authority over everyone. That means many times U.S. military personnel, aid experts, and so they are there as the senior U.S. official to deal with crises that may happen, to take care of American citizens that may happen. I think
isn't there also kind of an informal power that comes in the reverse? If you don't have a confirmed nominee, the country believes, wow, we must not be that important in the United States.
100%.
Because if we were important, they would have bothered to do what Russia and China and every other nation does and have an ambassador occupying the embassy.
I was in Ethiopia 3 weeks ago. I met with the African Union leadership. They cannot understand why we don't have a U.S. ambassador to the African Union, career person, given everything that's happened in Sudan, and all across the region, and the huge implications it has not to have a U.S. official sitting at the table. That's one example. I mentioned 250.
And there's nothing you can say to them that disabuses them from the notion of, if we mattered to you, you would have someone here, right? I mean, you can give them every explanation. Oh, the Senate's a complicated place, and there's procedural holds, whatever. But the message that they're going to take, no matter what you say, is, if it mattered to you, you would have someone here.
Exactly. There's nothing we can say to make them feel better. Also, I would just say for the candidates and their families, partners, whatever their situation is, it is an enormous devastating morale issue as well. And it's just personally incredibly difficult. If you have children, for example, and you don't know if your kids are going to attend 7th grade in a foreign capital or maybe 8th grade or 6th grade, you can't plan. You don't know what's going to happen. Let's say you're coming from the private sector or civil society or academia. You can't plan. I know this doesn't seem like a big issue, but for families, it's really...
It seems like a big issue to me. It would seem like it would create a significant retention challenge with mid-career people if they felt like their future was not based on the merits of their service, but somebody's going to hold them up for something unrelated to anything that they did.
Unrelated, and I will tell you a lot of the holds are not public, they're secret. So we don't even know who to turn to try to get the hold.
So because they're secret, again, I know what this means, but just for the public, if somebody on the Senate is holding you up and it's secret, you don't even have the ability to go to the person and say, hey, tell me all your concerns and let me try to reassure you. And maybe I can or maybe I can't, but at least honor me for the years that I've devoted to this country and give me an opportunity to just answer your questions and explain myself.
And again, we need to solve this for our diplomats, regardless of what administration you're in. I am proud to be here on behalf of the Secretary and the Biden administration, but I don't want the next administration and the future ones to face similar challenges. We need our diplomats out and development experts out in the field, showing up, actively engaged, representing the United States. And today we are not doing that the way we could be and should be.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I thank Senator Kaine for raising that issue. It's been one of the most challenging aspects of being chairman of this committee is trying to move nominations. We have, I guess, 4 hurdles. First, we have to make sure we have all the adequate information concerning the nominee, and that sometimes that takes some time. But then we have to schedule hearings, then we have to schedule a business meeting, then we have to get it through the floor. And all those are obstacles to the process. I wanted to acknowledge Senator Ricketts came up with a good suggestion. We talked the other day on how we might be able to move the career nominees a lot faster. So I think there is, I hope, bipartisan interest to try to get the career nominees done as quickly as possible. And I couldn't agree more with the Deputy Secretary that holding up a nominee, particularly a career nominee for an unrelated to that individual's qualifications, is something that needs to end. Senator Ricketts, anything further?
Yeah, actually, if I could just real quick, we mentioned about the PRC and the issue with the global footprint here. According to Lowry's Institute for 2024 Global Diplomacy, the People's Republic of China has the most expansive diplomatic network in the world, followed by the United States, but the PRC has a larger footprint in Africa, 60 posts to R56, East Asia, 44 to R27, Pacific Island countries, 9 to 8, catching up, Central Asia, 7 to 6 after we drew out Afghanistan. Obviously, we've talked about some of the diplomats and stuff, and I know that we're hitting up on the time here, so I'll get to it. How are we doing versus the PRC, versus the competition? We've made some progress, right? We've opened up some new embassies in the Pacific, but how are we doing?
Yeah, Senator, thank you. It's a question we spend a lot of time working on, and I think we are doing well. When our diplomats are engaged, the tradecraft they bring to the table, the tools and the skill sets they bring are at the top in terms of capabilities. The challenge that we are facing, again, is one, showing up, getting our people out. Secondly, it is a budgetary challenge as well. I really appreciate now that we have new tools like Development Finance Corporation, we have old tools like Millennium Challenge Corporation, but again, look at our State Department funding for this year is going to be cut by 6%. We have this staffing gap. We have the confirmation challenges. So there's a lot we can do. Frankly, we are a national security agency. I think we ought to be funded and treated like a national security agency. And I think that would actually help us compete a lot better. So just like you're doing with state authorization, and we have a bill now, thanks to your leadership and the chairman's leadership, it's going to the defense bill. We need to think of our budget like a national security budget too, and not kind of pick winners and losers in the national security game. We need to look at the landscape that we are confronting. So I would like to have a bigger global footprint. I would love to show up in more places. We are also constrained by the reality of what we're up against, but when we compete directly, we do quite well.
Okay. Just briefly to follow up on that, I know there was discussions about opening up embassies in Vanuatu, Kiribati, the Caribbean, maybe even embassy in Libya. Can you bring us up to date on any of those?
Yeah, so thank you, Senator. The Pacific Islands progress has been good. So new posts in Solomon Islands, Tonga, we are planning Vanuatu, Kiribati, so those are all coming up. And these will not look like typical embassies, and they are kind of embassies of the future. We are going to have people. I was at our embassy in the Seychelles. It is very different than what one might think of with a typical embassy, but it's important that we are there and have a presence. These will be challenging assignments for people, but also super important, and we have a lot of interest in them. So on that front, we are doing well. I think our Indo-Pacific strategy is a holistic strategy. I look at our new partnerships, whether it's the Quad or whether it's AUKUS. So we are showing up in different ways, different alignments, and different partnerships. So, and you mentioned our new embassies in the Caribbean, which we hope to open up here too. Again, funding challenges we have to work within, but yes, we would love to be more places. We've got to show up in the places that we are trying to staff as well, which we, again, have some posts that are hard to fill. So we're trying to work on both at the same time.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Deputy Secretary.
Senator Kane, anything further? Well, Deputy Secretary Verma, thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you very much for your service. The committee record will remain open until close of business tomorrow for members